with Robin Johnson, who's responsible for digital transformation within Vodafone. Robin gave us a really insightful presentation yesterday regarding 5G, and we're delighted to welcome him back to the stage again this morning, where he's going to be talking about adoption and utilisation. And I always find the adoption and utilisation part of a project really interesting. Quite often we can get investment around the technology, but it can be hard to get the investment around that adoption and utilisation piece. And I think picking up on some of the stuff the panel were talking about yesterday, where the projects that the technology that we're buying now, a lot of the time what you're buying is the potential. I think adoption and collaboration is even more important. So Robin, I'll hand over to yourself and we'll pick up for some questions and answers at the
Lovely, thanks, Esther. I hope you can see my screen. Yes, good morning, everybody. Robin Johnson is my name, Vodafone. I'm a digital transformation specialist within Vodafone, and my job is to consult with clients on how to adopt and actually create a digital transformation strategy, which in actual fact means a lot of the different things to different people. And underlying how we get to the outcome statements required when delivering any sort of strategy, actually, but digital transformation. For the next 30 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about user adoption and what my experience and Vodafone's experience is in the marketplace. And I have a couple of key points I'd like to make throughout the presentation, which I will elaborate on. The first one is that user adoption is really where where it sits within the return on investment model. Okay, so I have a model which I will show you and talk you through about how organizations at a high level could follow a particular resource path, could follow a particular action path, and more importantly, which areas do they need to focus on first, and then try and make some statements around where break-even looks like, what break-even looks like, essentially being able to maximize the investment on any budget that's assigned to a project, and then discuss where the user adoption sits in that. And then I'd like to talk about change and what that means to behavior, and how we might, again, going towards user adoption, how customers and clients of ours might be able to increase user adoption using a very simple model. So 30 minutes of me taking you through that. I've just got 2 slides, and we will hopefully get some Q&A throughout the session. So the first slide that I'm talking you through here is, hopefully you can see it, is essentially a model that I have built for clients to understand where user adoption, and more importantly, where the services of any digital transformation project sit. And this model in particular is a very high-level approach to where the resources, the investment of the resources, and the reviews of those resources needs to sit in terms of time against resource. So I'll just take you through this model. The key element for me is the bottom left-hand corner. You're going from 100%, you've got a budget to deliver a digital strategy, and because you've mapped out exactly where that sits, and you eventually, your budget will potentially be spent at the top left. So you're going from 100% to 0%. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that how you get your return on investment. This is all part of the objective. So yesterday we talked about technology. We talked about, from a supplier perspective, we talked about what those outcome statements look like and how we make the boat go faster, potentially as a partnership approach. And more importantly, what those objectives look like. Now, in many instances, user adoption is actually driven off the back of outcome statements, business outcome statements, which could be as general or as specific as customers really want. Now, the key for me in that whole space is sticking to those business outcomes. And this model will give you an idea as to what those outcomes look like. And I'll give you an example of one shortly. So at the bottom of our pyramid, we've got the infrastructure. Okay, so this is your connectivity, whether it be over the air, whether it be rapid deployment, whether it be temporary deployment, whether it be actual physical infrastructures. And obviously that has changed slightly now with the current environment that we're in. And that has really driven the the agile and flexible infrastructure. But the key point here is it is a most important part in delivering any services out to any adopter. Now, due to the consumerization of IT, which we have been talking about best part of 10 years, certainly since the advent of smartphones, that consumerization of IT has driven customer behavior, user behavior, employee behavior to such an extent that actually there's more expectation rather than hope. So users expect software services and any work environment just to work. They don't want to be in a position where they are discussing or having to ring IT help or actually having to be frustrated by user error. Now, 9 times out of 10, that comes down to 3 things. It comes down to, I want it now, not in 3 minutes time. I want the information now. I want to be able to quickly and effectively attach myself to a network to ensure that it's secure and I can get access to the things that I want. And I want to have multiple devices. So that infrastructure is really crucial. If you don't right size that infrastructure for the outcome statements based on your digital strategy, clients find that actually your user experience and therefore potentially the user adoption becomes less of a meaningful experience and therefore less of an adoptive process. Now, who's involved in that? The infrastructure team. You're probably going to have a supplier on the back of that who can work in partnership with you to be able to provide that provision, that service provider, but you're going to have to test. So the infrastructure is absolutely crucial. And then you've got the security. I won't go into a huge amount of that today, but you do have security on the back of that. So depending on the access methodology, what does that security look like? Is that security going to be able to prohibitive in terms of delivering the outcome? Or is that security going to be a necessity? I've had one client recently who's been attacked by ransomware while going through this digital transformation project, and it's stalled their business for 2 weeks and actually stalled their project for 2 weeks. So that security element is an absolutely crucial piece of this model. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, you got to test and accept, but actually across the entire piece from the security team, it is absolutely crucial that the end user is kept in mind when looking at security. So, give you an example of that, video conferencing in this new world that we have is a prioritized application potentially. And if it's a prioritized application in order to deliver the experiences we're enjoying now, then what is the implications on the firewall? What is the implication to our security policies? And that needs to continue to have the end user in mind, as well as obviously blacklist, whitelist, DNS, etc. And then you've got your standard software services going across the top. And those standard software services certainly within my context, are simple things like, well, not simple things, but services like Office 365, tools, collaboration tools outside of the Office suite. We've potentially got some software as a services environment. We've got some platform as a service environments, but they are standard. Doesn't matter what level you enter the organization, you get this infrastructure, you get the software services. Collaboration tools. The delivery team is actually part of the first part of a non-IT aspect. And Andy McDonald yesterday from Aberdeen talked about it, articulated it really well. When actually the delivery element of a user adoption approach, the delivery element of any software as a service, any cloud-based environment, actually, the delivery element is more than simply IT. It's HR, it's potentially supply chain, it's potentially operations. Anywhere where there is a touch point needs to be part of that delivery team. And this adoption process from an end user perspective needs to be driven from the top down. I'll give you a good example. Within Vodafone, about 8 years ago now, Vodafone decided that the rationalization piece for us across all our offices across the UK was going to be crucial in terms of cost benefit processing. And there was a very simple directive coming from the very top, from the senior management of Vodafone Group. We are all going to be remote workers. Therefore, we can utilize our Newbury offices to 150, 160% capacity, as opposed to having the rush for regular seats. So overnight, Overnight, all the offices were cleared, and it was open desk policy. Come and sit where you want to sit. Don't have to be in the office. Work from home. Get agile. Get flexible. Now that philosophy, that action. Are we delivering? Are we delivering? Are we delivering against the outcomes? And that delivery team involved right across the board, all separate elements of our business. Within the internal review, you've got to define, you've got to test, and you've got to accept. You've got to accept that step-by-step rollouts of those services have to have some elements of user adoption, the end user at the back of the mind. Is that simple for them to do? Is that a large move from what they're doing right now? Understanding where they sit. Is that a move from where they are now? Does it look the same? Is the interface compatible with current work practices? And once you've delivered potentially those three elements, you've got a standard platform, a standard point of reference whereby you could actually make and test and decide whether you've got a product and efficiency break even. So your investment from infrastructure to delivery of software services, that investment has a break even point in terms of productivity. How do you measure productivity? Number of tools out there. For us, productivity is based on the amount of time an employee is doing meaningful exercises. There are more, and that could be simply down as a survey. Efficiency, are we resizing and consolidating our infrastructure to be able to reapportion costs that we potentially had before? So there is a productivity and efficiency break even from a financial return, and that I would suggest is where it starts. Once you have that core platform and you've got that productivity and efficiency break even, then you start heading into what I would call the gravy. This is where you actually start ramping up your return on investment. So the communications and citizen interaction, okay? So contact center, both inbound and outbound, being proactive, collaboration tools, voice, mobility, instant, persistent chat, where you can start changing the communication infrastructure to a position where it is more digital, frankly. Certainly within Vodafone, we spend a huge amount of time with customers talking about what the impact of the changing the communication strategy is going to be. And that involves a different type of employee. That involves a communications team. And I don't simply mean an IT team who can look after a PBX or something like that. I actually mean internal comms, HR, potentially finance, but anywhere there's a communication structure and they have a stakeholder in this environment. This is all, remember, moving towards that user access and acceptance. Then once we're into that position, then you're into another position where you start looking at real digital capability around over-the-air workforce applications. Simple things where you can take forms and digitalize them, make them a process, particularly within supply chain, where any order, any request for purchase is digitalized in a platform. And those over-the-air applications, again, going towards those outcome statements, again, making sure the end user is always at the forefront of the mind. Is this going to make us more efficient? Is it going to make the boat go faster? Those kind of workforce applications, those kind of environments where you're making a change potentially in a simple context from paper to digital. Is this a huge step away from what they're doing right now? And at that point there, then you're into user acceptance and ambassadors. And Andy talked about them yesterday, where you talk about master practitioners, where you talk about digital ambassadors, digital managers, where they are promoting from point to start to finish the entire user acceptance piece. Now, in my view, and I've seen this a couple of times with some clients of mine, there are two ways of doing that user ambassador / user adoption piece. One is what I call the big bang approach. This is what we're doing. This is the way it's going to work. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. This is what it is. You're either in or you ain't, essentially. Slightly more, I'm being slightly simple around that attempt, but it is the kind of environment from the top coming down. We're changing the way we're going to work from Monday, and you give people enough time to prepare for doing that, and all the training and Communication happens prior to that piece, and then all you're doing is monitoring and driving that adoption piece through the stats on a daily basis. The other one is to do the soft approach, which is, okay, you start layering on services department by department, creating digital masters within each of those departments who are simply there to provide and promote. And the provision and promotion is done in two ways. One, it's done with, yeah, no, I understand that you think you want to do it that way, but what about if we did it this way? The other part of that ambassadorial piece in those departmental heads is really driven on the back of continuous communication, a figurehead, somebody that a go-to person. Is that not working? Could I do it this way? And you continue that continuous improvement exercise. There are some cultures, particularly in some industries, where the top-down approach, big bang approach works. And depending on the complexity of that digital transformation element, really probably may define whether that works or not. But 99% of the customers I talk to tend to do this ambassadorial piece. Again, the head ambassador comes from the top. It comes from the managing director, the chief executive, from the senior management and leadership team, who are promoting themselves in action as well as in words that they are digitally adopting. Now, the important point around all this piece is kind of two things. One is when you get to layering on those services, so you've got the platform, you've got the security, you've got your core services, and then you start layering on the real efficiency and productivity gains, your return on investment will ramp up, because suddenly you've got to a position where potentially for social care can do one more client interaction a week, where potentially you've got a scenario where it takes 2 days rather than 4 days to push something through a governance process. Those efficiency savings need to be recorded. So understanding and how those processes work will also give you a direct correlation to what user adoption and acceptance you have. But when you start getting beyond the productivity and efficiency break even, then you start driving real return on your investment. Do you ever reach 100%? Probably not. Employee turnover will certainly dictate that. We'll also certainly have a scenario where you may have to monitor and adapt to a particular style to a particular solution set. They may find that the consultation elements as you go down the department heads and the communications teams and the broader digital champions throughout each of the departments, you may find that actually there needs to be an adaptation of that process in order to drive a greater productivity efficiency gains. There is a school of thought that suggests that in order to get user adoption to its highest level, you have to be willing to and be agile enough to change within 24 hours. I don't particularly subscribe to that because every organization is different, but you do have that, the agility and the flexibility to be able to react will drive greater user adoption. There is a culture of change going through any digital transformation. And again, I make the point that digital transformation is a bit like the word cloud has been in the last 5 or 6 or 10 years. Everybody has a different opinion as to what it is. Everybody articulates the definition differently. And I think we're at that stage now. But ultimately, for me, digital transformation is all about user adoption. All return on investment models are built on the fact that our people will use this new environment and will receive the benefits thereof. So without that user adoption, you won't get the return on investment, and you won't get the return on investment in a timeline that is matched against your outcome statements. And I think that is absolutely crucial. I've seen a customer recently actually build an entire user adoption team across their organization. Pros and cons of that: you've got a team dedicated to delivering that mechanism that is reportable, is actionable, and is accountable for delivering user adoption. The flip side to that is it is a lot of resource all driving in the same direction, just focusing clearly on user adoption. But they do get the return on investment quicker. So this model is a very high-level outline as to what areas that need to come into place in order for user adoption to be able to be driven And that's really the word, driven across an organization when you're talking about a culture of change. Just while we're on the topic of culture of change, just thought I'd spend 10 minutes talking about what change looks like and how do you drive that user adoption. And I've built this model here, which I hope will give you some context, if you excuse the pun, some context around what the change manner is. Human beings are creatures of habit. In order to drive adoption or change, if you like, you need to control the behavior. You need to change the behavior of people. You need to change the behavior as to when it comes to making a decision. And in order to change the behavior, in my opinion, you need to drive context into every communication that comes out. So there has to be a context as to why that behavior needs to change and therefore why the adoption is a good thing. Now, in order to do that, this model demonstrates to you a number of things that, and it's driven by the word continuous. So it's a continually evolving process. So in order to drive context, you must have continuous communication from the digital champions in those departments around what that context is. Simple example. Simple example is door passes, right? So in the past, traditionally, certainly, when you are in a secure area, when you're going through door to door, you would use the pass that's on your hip. Boom, done. The context or the change, the digital change, is that now becomes part of your mobile phone, your corporate asset. So actually you're scanning your mobile phone against the piece. Now that sounds like a very simple change, but for some people who are just naturally pulling out their pass and swiping up or swiping onto a keypad, it is a change. But the context is you don't have to carry another badge with you. It's on your phone. You'll always have your phone with you. That is your security pass to get through the front door. The context is carrying less. The behavior is, I've always got my phone on me. Oh yeah, I must use my phone. The adoption will then be driven because people realize there's a context, or there's a benefit built on the back of it. So that constant continuous communication. Continuous assessment of that context is really important. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I mean that is the context still live in our current environment? Let's give an example. Supply chain would be a good example, where you have, or purchasing would be a good slide, or procurement potentially, where you have the context of, yes, the government rules are staying in place, but we're doing it in a slightly different context where we are actually going out, as we discussed yesterday, to work in partnership. I want you to engage, I want you to change. The context is a better outcome. Driving that continuous assessment of, like, are we getting better outcomes from that change? Are we getting better supplies, better supplier structure, better supplier engagement, more trust, more outcome capable statements from that assessment? And if not, change. You've got to be adapting, you've got to be monitoring. And then the final bit is the continuous engagement piece around context. Employees need to know what's going on around that context. It's contextual to their job, it's contextual to the organization. It has to be engaging. That context drives different behaviors. So again, a continuous investment in that behavior. And I don't mean financial investment, I mean investment from the top down, if that's the approach we're taking, from the senior management. They have to change their behavior. The management changes their behavior in a context, clearly, then the adoption will drive. Continuous communication, intranets, emails, bulletins, video casts, all those elements, all using the same contextual language around behavior change, efficiency, productivity, make the boat go faster. All that kind of language is continuous and standard. It will drive different behaviors. And then the final one for me is this improvement. It's got to be continuous improvement. So you can monitor how that user adoption is being taken to, and how that change is driving. Now, this is just a very simple model that shows the different areas of getting change inside, or adoption inside any sort of digital transformation strategy. It could be related across multiple pieces, but the key message is it's adaptable, it's flexible. You have to be adaptable and flexible as part of that delivery management. Looked at potentially on a week-by-week basis, and the strategy built out across there. So I've taken 30 minutes there just to take you through two key things. First one is a user adoption model, where I outlined to you a very structured pyramid approach, where you get the infrastructure right, where you get the security and the software services, the productivity and efficiency break-even piece, and then you drive real return on investment when you start going towards user adoption services. Then you've got to look at monitor adoption. You've got to change the behavior. You've got to change the way the context is looked at. And how do you do that? A continuous space, probably a 2 to 3 year strategy, as Annie declared yesterday. It's improvement in communication. It's improvement in context. It's a continuous engagement with those digital managers, ambassadors, and department heads to make sure and to monitor exactly how that is progressing. So, hope that was useful for you. Are there any questions?
Great, thanks for that, Robin. I've got a few questions to follow up on. So really just like the very last bit you ended on, you were talking about user adoption. And one of the things I always find really hard is that it's a really difficult thing to measure. So like when you're trying to get budget or you're trying to get resource, quite often the adoption piece gets forgotten about. I just wondered if you've got any advice around how you can how you can measure it, or even how you can monetize it, because obviously, like I was working with an organisation, and what they said was that their chief officer, they're really interested in the bottom line, and when you look at something like 365, about it's better collaboration, better communication, and it can be really difficult to actually put like pounds and pence on that. And I just wondered if you had any advice in relation to that.
So that's a great question, and this is the conversation between what's a soft cost and what's a hard cost. What's a soft saving and a hard saving? How do you put a value on one extra appointment a day? How do you put a value on being able to deliver potentially one extra piece of administration per day? And the answer to that question is really, there is no answer to that question. You have to come up with a model based on your organizational structure by which you think you can put a value on it. So that model is based on the cost of people's time and the output thereof. So let me give you an example. Let's just take, I don't know, some quick examples of if you can articulate that you can provide an hour a day, which is quite a lot, right? Which is an hour a day back into somebody's day. You can then roll that back to a financial perspective of what you're getting from that employee based on what their salary is. Now that's a soft cost. It's not a cost that comes down to the bottom line. What it does do, though, is that it will increase potentially the revenues that come back. So that 1 hour, based on the revenue that comes from that organization divided by the amount of staff that you have, could have also a value attached to it. So you can marry the two across. The hardest bit, to your point, Esther, is getting finance to understand that that is the way of monitoring and evaluating it, because it's not a hard cost. It's not a bottom line cost. I've worked with 2 customers in the past who have had this challenge. And this is actually why I've said in the past, look, you need to have somebody in finance on this journey with you. They need to be part of this infrastructure, this digital transformation project, because they've got to understand what we're trying to achieve. And if they can understand it and be able to articulate further up the chain how we're getting to that position, how we're getting to a financial number, then the acceptance piece around the outside suddenly, well, actually, maybe it is a bottom line. Bottom line finish. So I've got one example I'll give you. They're a shipping organization, right? And the shipping organization had two clear outcomes in their statements. They wanted to ship more and bill more as a result. That was it. That was their 2 high-level outcome statements. Okay, so how do we look at billing? How do we look at shipping more? Because one is directly related to the other. If we can get to bearing in mind there's a capacity issue in some of the ports, if we can get to a position, and this was just an aspirational piece, if we can get to a position where we can deliver 1 more container a week, what would that do to our bottom line? And they came up with a figure as to what that would look like. That's just 1, right? So that's a baseline. Then they said, okay, so what resources do we need to put in place to make that happen, short of creating 26 hours in a day? They understood and then drove that further down to say, well, actually, if we streamlined that particular element, and it was a manifest element, if we streamlined that particular element where we could be digitally attached to the particular to the government to be able to get through the licensing element, the taxing element, if we streamlined that and we had an agreement with our contact that they could return inside an SLA, then we could do one more. Yeah. And that became an actual bottom line addition. Now, in reality, they actually did more than one a day. But the point is, particular process.
And I suppose just kind of attached to that point around the user adoption is a bit around the internal comms. And I mean, I don't know if it's the same in the public sector, but I do find that quite often internal comms when a project is left behind. And I know that you talked about involving like the internal comms as a department. Quite often in the public sector, that's one person, or isn't even one person, it might be half a person. So the idea that they could be spread across like all the projects is not realistic. And quite often the internal comms part has to be more the role of the kind of something. And I suppose like it's one of those things like when folk are really busy, it's the comms part that actually gets forgotten about. Or what we do is we put it on the internet and then we tick the box and we've told people about that. And I was just quite interested when you were talking about using different types of comms, because quite often I say like you have to tell the same people the same message, but in like loads of different formats. So you put it on the internet, you do a vlog. I just wondered if you had any other advice around how that we can get better at that within the public sector and within our projects, because probably, and I know it came out yesterday on the panel, really, really strongly was around communication and really improving our storytelling around digital. I think it's no talking about the technology, it's actually talking about the difference it is going to make. And I just wondered if you can expand on that a wee bit more.
Sure. So, this is a question of how do we make sure that communication is meaningful to the right people at the right time. Yeah. And there's two key things I want to say about that. One is that the communication infrastructure it doesn't necessarily need to sit with a internal communications manager. Those digital champions, those digital ambassadors are more than simply somebody who, oh, what if I did this? How do I do that? You know, in the department, they are actually the champion of the communication as well. So share the workload, make it contextual for that department. So there was certainly I've worked with a public sector organization in the south of England recently where I've said to them, would it be beneficial to have a mandatory 15 minutes to talk about communication, digital change in every team meeting? You know, just at the bottom of the agenda, not necessarily any AOB, but at the bottom of the agenda have digital comms. And somebody within that digital champion within that group would then describe, articulate, and be able to tell the story of the next thing that's coming down, because people hear what they want to hear. They don't necessarily listen. The other way, and some people are visual, some people are communicating in different ways. The other way of doing it is to make sure that the content that is driven either by departmental or at a central level uses the same language. So have a common structure of the language. I'll give you a good example of that. I talked about it yesterday, and it's a tech example more than anything else. A lot of people talk to us about Wi-Fi. I need better Wi-Fi. I need to be able to deliver that end user experience in a Wi-Fi scenario. Well, actually, it's not Wi-Fi. It's wireless. Why stop at the Wi-Fi and drive? So we're now changing the language that we use throughout all our clients to talk about wireless, not Wi-Fi. Now, that simple change gets people thinking a bit further. Wireless, what are you talking about? I'm talking about a mobile phone, a laptop, which is wireless, or potentially a speakerphone, Bluetooth speaker. Something as simple as that suddenly goes a bit further and a bit more personal to them. So it's a change in language that helps. There is no doubt that in a public sector organization, the size, the structure, the diversity, that the communication structure is more than one person. It has to be shared, share the workload. Because that context, local context, will be far greater.
So quite an interesting question here from Peter. You talked a wee bit, when we talked about value, you were talking about revenue and things. Have you found any clients or customers that have been able to put a measure around social value?
No. Is the short answer to that.
Okay.
I haven't. There's two. I haven't found anybody who's been able to put monetary value against it, but I have found an organization that's willing to accept that the social value adds value to their brand.
Right. Okay.
They couldn't put a value against it, and it's not pounds, shillings, and pence, but they do accept that it is improving the value of their brand.
Right. Okay. Peter, I didn't know if you wanted to give any more detail around that, or if there were organisations that you were aware of that were measuring social value.
Typing away furiously.
What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just invite Peter up to the stage and just get him to give us a bit of feedback around his question around the social value. Hi, Peter. I just thought it was a really interesting question. I thought it would be worth getting you to chat through a wee bit more in relation to that.
Well, it's one of the biggest kind of dilemmas we've got for the last 3 or 4 years in local government, because we keep on coming around to this point. So what social value do we provide? And there's quite a lot of things done in the central government, and they've had a couple of think tanks trying to create some kind of indicators and some measures. So if we talk about something like planning, so the planning function, so what, in a monetary term, okay, we get a lot of fee and you make some money out of the fee, but it probably doesn't justify its kind of the elements you try and balance up. So if we go back to like the voice of the customers we always talk about, and I always face this in lots of areas in the functions in local government, really the voice of the customer, you're balancing up the future children, you've balanced up the environment, you've balanced up the wildlife aspect, the developer itself, and you could apply this to social care as well. So you're balancing up the needs of the person in need, but also you've got to think, well, we can't pay for everything, so we've got to balance that up with the NHS. We can't actually provide them what they really want, we only can provide them what they actually need. And it goes back to this question about social value. So every time we go to now I noticed in a lot of our kind of structural diagrams, like the government's boards and the kind of the business case that go to our steering groups, they're asking this kind of question. And I think, well, how do I be preventing a poor bit of development in a city centre? How do I put some kind of monetary value or some kind of some evidence that actually that social value, yeah, aspirationally I can say, yeah, we've made a really nice city centre, or we prevented that out of town development, but how do I show that further on?
I think one quite good example of that's how I think we talked about it yesterday. I don't know if it was on the panel or one of the other sessions, but it was the mention around digital exclusion. I think it was maybe in the 5G session, Robin, when we talked about, like, there's been a lot of work done around if people are using the internet, they've got access, they've got the skills. There's actually been work done on how much they can save financially. So that's maybe slightly easier to do. And I know that one of the organisations that I used to work with, they were looking at things like when they were taking budget savings out. So, like, quite a good example is, like, if you're looking at shutting community centres, like, what's the actual social impact of that, and can you put pounds and pence against it? So if you're not giving kids, like, meals in the morning, or they've not got activities to do at night, what's the overall impact of that? But it's really complicated, and I think it's one of the things to make sure that if you're removing spend for one area, that actually it doesn't create cost within the other area. I've got Ian with his hand up here as well. Ian, I'm just going to invite you up to the stage.
Hello again.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Robin. You're making sense as always, and I just found your answer really refreshing, as in none, because I, to be honest, I find this quite irritating. I think, Peter, you and I spoke yesterday, and I think this is just a fad. This is a nonsense, this social value thing, because it's entirely appropriate. We're asked it as suppliers as part of our bids. Now, the authority that's asking for social value input has to be cognizant of the value of the contract, because I've applied, for example, for software maintenance. And you put in a bid for software maintenance, and it might be 30 grand a year. And they're asking, what social value are you going to add in the middle of our city? Well, there's none. You know, I'm on the end of a piece of a wire. You know, I'm answering a global 24/7 service. The person answering might be offshore. We are not going to build a homeless centre in the middle of, for example, Manchester for 30k per annum contract for 2 years. It's not appropriate. And I've had conversations with consultants, for example, who are being asked for 6 months consultancy for a piece of work, being asked for social value. If you're going to build a motor plant, or indeed if you're going to build offices in the middle of a city, then of course you're adding social value, you're adding jobs, you can offer vocations, you can offer apprenticeships, you can do all that stuff, but it has to be apposite to the contract that the authority is asking for, rather than just a general add-on if the authority is buying 3 PCs.
I mean, I think that's the case with any of these things, Ian, that they have to be appropriate, and that to me just sounds like an organisation that's got a procurement framework and they just...
Oh, but there are many, Esther.
Regardless of the contract value.
I mean, I think, Esther, it's not just a one-off. I'm seeing this all the time. It's become the standard clause to put into public sector contracts. It's almost taken over from, you know, some more fashionable clauses previously.
And that's the element of the problem, because of course, what are we asking? How do I know? It's not that. So it's a bit, even from me working inside it, it's going, so what do you really mean? And it's very difficult then I break it down. I might break it down. I might use the quality kind of framework and try and break it down into little chunks. Well, actually, what do you mean by that? And then they all lose themselves because it gets too detailed. But
it's almost a question that's been asked the wrong way around. Actually, it's supposed to be, we should be asking the contractor, the council, if you like, the public sector body, what social value are you driving off the back of the fact that you're providing this environment? So I'll give you a really good example of that. So there is I do quite a lot of work for the Northern Ireland public sector, and there is as standard, there is a clause in there, social values. What are you bringing to the table? What are you going to do about your environment around you? Are you employing local people? We have stock answers to that, but nobody ever comes back and checks it. Nobody ever says to you, did you actually do that? Are you employing apprentices locally? Are you delivering against your social, ethnic environment? Nobody quite questions it. So it's almost like a tick box exercise. Now, this is my point around productivity, efficiency, and actually, I kind of understand the sentiment, but it's more about reverting that back to that public sector's outcomes. Is your outcome, or what I deliver back to you based on your parameters, is that going to provide you with the opportunity to hit one of your parameters, one of your outcomes? And is that outcome a social outcome? And if it is, you put a value on it. I'm not going to you put a value on it. That's kind of what you're there to deliver against a strategic plan.
And that's quite an interesting approach. I've just actually got one more question, Robin, which probably goes back into the sort of user adoption side of things. I was quite interested what you were saying, and it's obviously quite topical regarding the move to remote working with Vodafone, that it was almost overnight. They just said everybody's working from home, desks were all cleared. So how did they deal with the kind of cultural aspects of that? And more from a kind of company point of view, I think everybody's talking now about the remote working and the challenges we face around keeping in touch and being able to collaborate. And I know that that's one of the issues that the panel are going to be debating after the break. So I was just really interested to hear how Vodafone had addressed that.
Okay, so I was a little broad stroked across that. So anybody, so our contact centers, our operational staff, our technical staff will clearly having to work from offices because that's where our network is, et cetera, and our customer engagement centers. What the evolution of that was over a period of time, right? So why our top guy, who at the time was a chap called Guy Lawrence, who made this bold statement: as of Monday, we are moving to a remote scenario. We're going to be able to save money here, 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 here. We're going to have a position where we're going to be more agile, and we're going to give you all the tools, IT tools, that you need to be able to work from home. In reality, we're still on that journey. It's not one of those things that happen, this is the way it must be. And this is never more valuable than in the last 9 months, in my view. And I think, and I'm working very hard, certainly with my team, around having some remote working etiquette, right? And it's not so much about, because there's no doubt, and I was talking to my colleagues earlier on this morning about it, actually, there is no doubt being forced to work from home, bearing in mind that we could be out seeing customers and traveling around the UK, working from home and in lockdown has made a difference to our productivity. There is no doubt at all. But it has had, the needle has almost gone the other way, to a point where we're getting to a position where your diary is so full of people who want to have a call with you immediately after your last call that you're becoming unproductive. Your brain just switches off. And there is no quality anymore. And the potentially complacency sits in place. So there's a couple of things that I've done which might or might not be relevant here for remote working in particular. So if we accept that culture is continually, the change behavior is continuing, particularly for those staff members who used to be in an office and now have to work from home, and that continuous improvement in IT, and actually Andy touched on it yesterday, we use a number of bots for IT support, etc., and the support from senior management to get what you need when you need it. There's a couple of things that we've introduced. One is you are not allowed to have a 1 hour meeting. It's not 1 hour, 45 minutes, absolutely, but it's not 1 hour. That gives you that 15-minute space between finishing a call and potentially starting another, right? Mentally, that's a huge difference. It's a massive difference. Second one we have is that every Tuesday and every Thursday in our team, we have a 30-minute coffee break where we talk about nothing. We talk about everything outside of work. We're not allowed to talk about work. And it's just a video. Now, it's not mandatory. You don't have to join it, etc. But we join and have a cup of tea, talk about the football, the cricket, whatever it happens to be.
So that's just an informal chat, Robin, where you're not talking about work. It's just a kind of informal team catch up.
Absolutely. And that's every Tuesday from 10 to 10:30 and every Thursday 10 to 10:30. That's it. And, again, it's not mandatory. If you've got a customer interaction or you're having to do something else, that's fine. But it is something that's available for people just to change the conversation, just to change the drive and the intensity, the relentlessness of remote working. The final one, which is a little what's I going to say? It's specific to my team. It's not a Vodafone-wide policy, but I have asked the team not to do any appointments on Friday afternoon. None. No customer interactions Friday afternoon. Because the guys have found a position where they're online from 8 until 5 or 8 until 6, and then there's always the other bits and pieces that go with it. Friday afternoon is sacrosanct, so you can, go and do the shopping or whatever it happens to be. But Friday afternoon, there's no customer interaction. Internal interaction, 45 minutes only, definitely. Friday afternoon, no customers.
That's all really interesting, and I know that the panel will be starting to talk around the collaboration, communication, and some of the changes. And I think tomorrow's session is all around collaboration, communication, and how we and well-being really. But that's some really good, actually, be practical things that maybe some other organisations can try. I'm just about to bring this session to a close. I'm conscious that we're due to go for a break and networking session, unless Ian or Peter have anything else that they would like to add. No. Right, thanks everybody for your contribution, and we'll see you back at 10:45 with our panel with the Improvement Service, the Digital Office, representation from the Danish Embassy, and Emmy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do we get out?